Fair
One
enough.
thing I would like to ask about is one area, obviously, where esports is very different from traditional sports, is that Riot Games isn't just, in this case, the person organizing the tournament, like the NFL organizes the NFL. They're obviously the game dev. And if you know about intellectual property rights for digital properties, they essentially are far more like overarching than anything in the real world. Like everyone knows the example, no one owns the concept of football itself. You can have the NFL brand, of course, which has all the history, and to a fan may be football, but it effectively isn't. Like we can start another league, we can do all sorts of things, right?
Yep. XFL, USFL.
Yeah, sure. Since Riot does obviously have this extra level of power, right? I haven't got like a set question. I'm essentially going to ask, like, how do you approach that? Because some of what you're essentially going to do, if it was, say, player concerns that was specifically about the game, like people think maybe it was too arbitrary the way I was punished, some sort of competitive ruling, or maybe it was too harsh, the actual punishment given, or maybe players think, I don't know, you should be allowed to trash talk in the game and that shouldn't be a punishment. Whatever these issues they might push back on. In your case, you're effectively, in some of these scenarios, aren't you effectively just hoping the best you can sort of do is maybe coerce them / get them on your side and hope they agree with you? They have sort of power that you don't have in other sports, right?
Yes, three-party system, absolutely. It's a very strange thing, and especially as someone who, I'm learning on the job in some ways. There's a part of this that is figuring out how do you learn on the job in a job that doesn't have a precedent. Like I can read all the baseball books I want, I can read all the football books I want, and at the end of the day, they are not dealing with a developer who, makes the game and owns the thing itself. So, it's one of the things as we talk about. You'll notice we're not saying like we're unionizing tomorrow. Getting enough funding to be able to collectively bargain and have the finances to do something like that is a huge first step to be able to get there. But, we also have to get the buy-in from the players to, vote and support unionization, which is, an education process and talking with them genuinely about, what are the positives or negatives, are the potential of a salary cap, is it outweighed by having more rights and free agency and more ability to like control your intellectual property? Like, there's a million questions that have to be answered along those ways that we have to get to. This is the first big step, but the other and much more monumental hurdle is, collective bargaining in the United States is a two-party design system. They didn't build this thing in the laws for three groups to work in it. And we cannot collectively bargain as a players association with teams if after we make a decision about, well, okay, players can go, have their own individual, like, liquor deals or something, and then we go, or they can, have a gambling sponsor or something, and then we collectively bargain that, and then we go back and the developer says, actually, you can't do that. And it undercuts our collective bargaining, right? So the only way collective bargaining works in esports is for us to find a pathway for they talk about bargaining units. So the teams in the NFL form a bargaining unit that is the league that serves as a single entity to bargaining. So even though there's 30 teams signing contracts, when they negotiate as one unit and agree to the outcomes of collective bargaining as a one unit that they will all honor. So, in our view, and we've communicated this with Riot already, is that, we're very interested in this, but we have to figure out a way for the teams in Riot to form a single unit so that we can bargain collectively. And that's a big thing to work through and to take that step. And there is no real legal precedent for this. It's untrod ground in many ways. I think that's why a lot of people are excited from the player side. I think a lot of legal folks are interested in, like, what does this look like? How does it work? It's groundbreaking. It's interesting, and it would fundamentally change the dynamics for how esports works if we were to do it. And I can tell you clearly right now, I do not have a good answer to how we get there. I'm not a legal expert. We've been talking with people, but there's a bunch of questions and a lot of uncertainty. And when your lawyers are uncertain about what the law is on stuff like this, then you're really like, in new territory. So that's the one we got to work through. That's how we have, as we work towards something like collective bargaining, how the developer fits into it. That's, open questions that have to be solved that we're talking with all stakeholders about. Because again, I think there's a lot of people, including Riot, including team owners, who think that collective bargaining is something that would benefit the league as a whole. And figuring out how we can do it properly is really number one on the list for projects aside from this.
I think we have to talk about the collective bargaining aspect of this now, if that's the path that this is going towards, because it's for those of you who don't know, right now the Players Association is not a union under American law. And one of the reasons why it's not a union, and I actually talked to Hal Biagas, the former head of the LCSPA, on the Essential Esports show that I did with Cloud9, if you guys want to go back and look at that for a comparison. But basically, what happens in America is that there cannot be a salary cap on the league unless there is a singular union or body to negotiate against, because otherwise it's a monopoly of the owners / Riot dictating what the prices of labor for the players is, basically. And the reason why there hasn't been a push towards unionization is that this is actually, I think, at least it has been true up to this point, that it's not in the best interest of the players, because as you can see in the LCS, having uncapped salaries basically results in star players getting paid way more than they probably would be getting paid, or allows them to collect onto a team like Team Liquid that has a bunch that's spending far more money than other teams, so that they can play together, basically a bunch of what would be broken up among multiple teams if there was a salary cap, or players would just be getting paid less for the opportunity to play on a better team, right? As is the case in many traditional sports. So why suddenly does it sound like you guys are kind of opening the pathway towards unionization when previously it has been argued that it is not necessarily in the player's best interest in order to approach this?
Yeah, I think that there's certainly some, misunderstanding about collective bargaining, how it works, and also, there's often, I think, in esports a rush to align like traditional sports in many ways. I mean, many player contracts have currently or have had in the past issues that would not pass antitrust muster, because again, unless you have collective bargaining, traditional sports, the thing that allow restrictions on player movement, on fixed contracts that you have to join a draft, those sorts of things are all components of collective bargaining.
Right. That's why we can't have a draft, by the way, guys.
Exactly.
Well.
Can you actually give an example of something that have been in real esports contracts that technically, they shouldn't have put in there? It was a bit naughty. Can you give it like a hypothetical?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's, like broad question around what sort of restrictions on going to play for other teams that a team can put in. If you're not in collective bargaining, and you haven't collectively bargained, that a player must play under, Ben Simmons is on a 5-year contract, he cannot give 2 weeks notice. A lot of states have right to work laws that say you can give 2 weeks notice on an employer, right? Like, there's like open questions in many active, commonly held contracts in esports that you wonder, well, would that actually pass antitrust muster? We know there have been questions in Overwatch League about
in phase if you followed that case. Yeah.
So these restrictions are all things that have yet to be settled in law or in court. There's been very little effort to fight in those precedents, but we get feedback constantly with Riot about rules and things where we say, hey, we're not sure that this would pass the antitrust muster. We don't think that this this is restrictive of an employee's right, outside of collective bargaining. How could a team restrict this based on labor law? So we're constantly asking and pushing those questions. And in traditional sports, again, collective bargaining, what it does in any unionization setting in America is it bypasses antitrust laws. So when antitrust is the law of the land in the U.S., it keeps groups from being able to collude to fix prices or set salary limits or anything like that, right? You can't do that. It's a fair open marketplace for employees to go and seek their best opportunities. And there are many laws that govern and protect employees and your ability to leave a job if you don't want to work there and go work somewhere else. There's all sorts of stuff in the law about that. When you unionize, you are basically, both parties are saying, we're agreeing proactively that we're going to be bound by whatever rules we agree to play by, regardless of antitrust. So we're agreeing to this new set of parameters. So that is how you get a draft, where the collectively bargained agreement says all new players who want to play in this league that has a union are going to submit for a draft and agree to play wherever they are drafted to. Right? That's a collectively bargained thing. You can't just do that in day-to-day life. You couldn't go, you couldn't finish school at an accounting school and just be drafted by PricewaterhouseCoopers and have to go work there for 3 years. You might feel that way.
Is it essentially because you're agreeing to do it, explicitly, this, or someone on your behalf, this means that it supersedes what would otherwise be the law?
Exactly. So that is, yeah. So you're going around it, and that's where the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, gets involved to make sure that these parties are willfully agreeing to do this bypass effectively. Is kind of the layman of how something like that works. So there's a lot to be gained there that isn't just a salary cap in terms of a player value that a team might want, including things like, putting together a draft or putting together player sectors. For us on a player side, it's setting we currently, the only thing that really sets the salary floor in academy is the fact that it's based in California, that we have people in California. And so the California minimum exempt salary is the law of the land on what a player can be paid, right?
Oh, okay.
So, that's sort of where that number comes from. Every year we talk to Riot and say, okay, well, they bump the minimum wage, and the minimum wage, you factor that in, it says, okay, $62,000 is the new minimum. So that's how those things work today. It's really just working off of existing existing labor laws that are they're, just the law of the land from the state. So if we set if we go into collective bargaining, then we have the power to say, hey, like, we're not going to accept that, that minimum, literally the least you can pay a person legally in California to do this kind of work. So we're going to ask for you to increase that number. That's going to be part of our bargaining, and we're going to raise the floor. So maybe there's an overall cap somewhere, or maybe there's a luxury tax or various methods that are used in traditional sports to try and level the competitive playing field, or like keep teams from spending well beyond their revenues. But there's also benefits. There's gains in the floor. As we saw in this last offseason, you had a lot of talk about things like contract jails. You obviously had the perk situation that Riot's already addressed in how that will be handled in the future. But if we're collectively bargaining, we're never allowing those situations to come out in the first place, right? We're never going to allow a third-party team to control the fate of a player after they've already left, right? Like those are things that we can do to protect players fundamentally. Establishing the lines for how IP is split, and how what a team has a right to do or ask for player. Most player contracts today still say that a player is responsible to do whatever commercial responsibilities a team asks of them that are within reason. This is like anathema to a typical talent contract. When you sign a contract to go work at Blast or something, every damn thing you're going to do, right? You're not showing up and just saying like, okay, I'm going to do whatever's reasonable, right? You have
like they can tell me, take down the scaffolding and then afterwards pack these things in the butt. Yeah, of course they can't do that. Yeah.
So you have exacting language about what's in there. Every player contract should have that, and it's really not the case today.
Yes.
A lot of them will have a few things laid out, but they still have a broad language that gives a lot of latitude for a team to just say, hey, yeah, I don't care. Like, your off day is not written into this contract. I can have you, come in and do content for us for 8 hours because that's, what we need you to do. So, these are like serious gains for players. We had teams who we talked to in my listening tour last year who said, we haven't had an off day in 7 weeks because we were doing content every day on the off day. Like, these are things that you collectively bargain that improve players, right? Improve players' lives, and the balance of life can be worth those risks or trade-offs. But we don't know that there will be a salary cap. There's a real question. I was on a team that had investment backed. There are many teams in esports who will tell you, out of one side of your mouth that esports is dying and they're burning money left and right, and on the other side are raising $50 million more and pouring it into a team to try and win a championship. If you're investment backed and your goal behind the scenes amongst your investors is to spend money to try and be the best team in the world, even if it means you're losing because you want to be the Yankees in 20 years and be established, then right. This is fundamentally a different economic model.
It's also true that part of what's going on with the esports team, as you allude to, Phil, is that when we look at sports teams in America, which is where these LCS teams are based, these are often toys for billionaires. Their valuation does not reflect the income that they are actually making, because there's a limited quantity of these things and they're fun for the ultra rich to own. Objectively, I would own an NFL team if I had billions of dollars. That would be rad. But the point is that when these people are building the business, they're trying to build a brand that is significant enough and prestigious enough to eventually justify being a very rich person's toy. That is like an exit. That's a legitimate exit strategy in the long run for esports teams. So yes, I agree with you, Phil, that they're playing a long game where they're like, I would like to be bought for $1 billion in 5 years, and I will spend $5 million on this player to hopefully accomplish that goal, right? And that's what their investors are signing up for. So there is an element of that, which makes it so the tiers of the owners are not, quite so sympathetic. But what I will say is, like, on the salary cap subject, I actually think the salary cap would be a very good thing for the LCS overall for the following reasons.
Monty was a former owner of an LCS team. Just want to say that.
Well, I don't have any.
To be said, if you're going to make a statement like I believe, I think that should be said. You know, as a disclaimer.
I currently do not have any ownership interest in any LCS.
All right, Scrooge, go on then. Tell us why they should never get paid anything.
You need the Adam McKay like production pop-ups, little chyrons that just like tell the story beside us as we ramble on about all the things that we have conflicts on historically.
So I think you have to look at the current issues with the LCS, because we can't say that this is as healthy of a league or a product as it was in 2016. Viewership is down. It's been viewership has gone up, in LEC and many other leagues, LCK comparatively to the LCS. It's not in rosy health, as it were. And with this viewership decline, like, we have to look at some of the problems that have been said. Like, obviously, like, the production has been an issue historically, although I do think that's improved this year. The quality of teams in international play is obviously, a topic of much conversation. Having North American players, I don't think that's really a factor, but some people say it is. And I think what happens with the salary cap is that, would you get a worse team? Most likely, because players would not be willing to take pay cuts in order to play with each other on a team like Team Liquid, right? That's just true. But a problem with LCS is that the team's branding, which is partially their own fault, has been really terrible. And I think the problem is that these star players are so concentrated on certain rosters that there isn't an ability for teams to sign long-term deals, for many of the lower tier teams to sign long-term deals. And for those people who are like, well, those teams wouldn't spend the money anyway. I think they would if they could reasonably like pay a star player and actually be able to build around them. The problem is that they don't even have access to get those star players to sign for money right now, or to concoct a business model or marketing strategy for several years around one of those players' contracts, right? And so I think truly that a lot of the LCS games are pretty boring because there aren't storylines and there are not star players, established star players in these teams, that could be solved by distributing star players across these rosters.
Maybe an analogy, Monty. Everyone who's watching LEC will know exactly what I'm talking about. The player who was almost certainly going to win the MVP in the LEC this split is the player Vethio from Misfits, right? And Misfits is not considered the biggest org in LEC. They're not the most prestigious. They haven't won the championships. In fact, this was a player that they picked up. It wasn't even like he was the most sought after player when he came into the LEC. They sort of picked him up as sort of a gamble, and it's paid off. He's not only become good, like I said, he's the best player in the whole league. The problem they have in Misfits, though, is at the end of this year, his contract will run out, and almost certainly, it's not even, this is the key, this is why I'm using this analogy. It's not that Misfits can't pay him what Fnatic or G2 will pay him. The real reason he will go to a Fnatic or G2 is because they've got the other superstars and he will win the league. Whereas if it was in a salary cap scenario like Monty's talking about, like the NBA, for example, if in Fnatic and G2, they've already got a couple of superstars they don't want to get rid of, and they're paying them an equivalent to a max deal, like an Aaron Rodgers type deal, then realistically, actually, Vethio's incentivized to maybe stay in Misfits and they can actually build a whole thing around him. He could be the face of Misfits for the next 5 years. Whereas the reality is probably he's gone at the end of this season. So that would be an example I would give.
And for those of you guys who are saying things like, well, that would just make NA more shit, stop being fucking delusional. NA is never going to do anything at international competition, even with NA super teams, okay? And also, international competition isn't everything. If 2/3 of the games in LCS are games that nobody wants to watch, that's not good for the health of the league. I would rather have the star players broken up, have distinct team identities be built around these star players. Oh. So at least the domestic matches are more interesting, guys. Like, that's what matters first and foremost. So not only that, so the salary cap, you can also do things such as reveal player salaries if you have a salary cap, which, by the way, if you want to attract American sports fans, being able to talk about things and speculate about, oh, they only have this much space left, like who's going to take this deal or how can they make it work? Here are the salaries on this team. That's content for you guys that's actually interesting. Number two, it allows you to have a draft And a draft is also something very interesting to sports fans. Like, imagine, if Jojo Pien, was this breakout star from the draft this year in LCS. It's a very compelling story. And by the way, guys, would also incentivize people to play more seriously in Academy, for fans to watch Academy, because your favorite team's new player that just got drafted is probably going to start their professional career in Academy, which is like, oh, well, I know this player was drafted. Now they've got a 3-year deal with this team. So I'm going to check them out and see if I can get hyped about this. It is so healthy for the overall scene, I think, in order to have a salary cap, by breaking up the star players and by having every team at least have an ability to come back. Because you guys wonder why teams don't spend money in this space. It's because there's no hope for them to be competitive. So you have the only two options for most LCS teams are spend a fuck ton of money to try and be competitive for Worlds, or to spend as little money as possible just to stay in and not lose. But there's no hope. There's no, if I'm at the bottom at the end of the year, I'm going to get first pick in the draft.
It's the reason why Jensen doesn't play for CLG right now, if you don't get that premise, for both parties.
Yeah, exactly. So, all of these things are creating an unhealthy environment in LCS that is boring to watch. And what's the purpose of it? The only thing we get out of this is false hope that an NA team might do well at MSI and Worlds, which accounts for a very small percentage of the total games that they're going to play this year.
I would rather false hope is the Jenkum that every NA fan has been huffing for the last 20 years. Without that, mate, it's 2 bulletins are back of the head out behind the woodshed. So, which do you want, mate? How do you want it? By the way, do you have any final point? I will just say after this, by the way, Philip, that's an open-ended rant that you can interact with and interface with anybody. There's no question at the end.
I wasn't going to interrupt.
Yeah, don't worry.
No, sorry. I'm sorry to go on this point, but I think it's actually the salary cap thing is actually good. And I know that certain players may not be able to play on these ultra stacked rosters, but I don't think the star players' salaries would necessarily go down dramatically. I just think they would be redistributed around the league, and it would create a better, healthier system. It would also create just a better path to pro to have a draft, because at least there's hope for people, right? It's like, it's so random right now, the way that things, new NA talent is brought up within the scene.
Yeah. There's a lot there. Again, at the point, many objections to the false hopes in NA and everything else. Please note, Richard, if you can, again for the record. But
he believes in NA teams.
By definition, he has to believe there's some hope, unless he's the most cynical bastard ever.
I mean, we can put on my bias hat at EG. When I came to EG, we got to the LCS. I'm very proud of the strategy that they have executed on from a competitive standpoint. Year one, we came in, we said we have to show that we're willing to spend. The Chovy rumors were very real. We were, ready to swing for the fences to prove that we wanted to compete, because you have to tell players that you want to be a winner. And, we also believed that we needed to develop talent, because that was, a proven method to be able, in traditional sports, to be able to build a sustainable model, was to develop and find young talent and sign them to contracts, where you see like the JoJo's of the world. So, I applaud Andy and Greg, who's now over at CLG, for the work that they did in building that roster. And they're not a top, they have not been a top, they've always outperformed their rank and sort of this in the salary side of things. And I think, more teams can or should be doing that, period, in the general sense of things. And I think there's a lot of recriminations that are well earned by LCS operations who didn't think strategically about how to both build faith among players in order to build, in order to get talent to come to you, and also to think about how can you be long-term sustainable and build a program that can succeed. You don't have to have a salary cap to understand the economics of traditional sports and how teams build and manage a revolving roster over a course of several years. That's, those things are proven and manageable. And you have leagues like baseball where there's where there's the lack of a hard salary cap that people work with all the time and build and develop. So I'll leave it there.
That NFL popularity, I think, obviously, who the fuck knows? Sure. There's too many factors. But one of the things that I think has caused the NFL...
Baseball, the ultimate sport where you have no hope if you support every team except two or something mental like that. Every time someone wins the fucking... I don't know baseball, mate, but every headline I hear is always and it's been 74 years since they won us. I'm like, who the fuck would support this team? You know what I mean?
That's the point.
It's a very old sport, that's all.
One of the things that's great about the NFL, and one of the things that I think has caused it to rise to the top popularity of any sport in America is the fact that legitimately small market teams can fucking win the NFL. The Cleveland or like the Cincinnati Bengals were in the fucking Super Bowl this year. Like that's, you know, you would expect these teams from New York and other big markets to potentially dominate, and they don't. Like they don't. So part of what's exciting about the NFL is it feels like small market teams can be legitimately good with the right luck and the right drafting and the right team building because the salary cap exists.
Yeah, and as with any sport, you're going to have, like, in traditional sports, even with salary cap, you have teams and ownership groups. You know, the Clippers under Donald Sterling are a great example. Like, you know, they had a salary cap in the NBA. It didn't matter because you had an owner in there who didn't know how to run the team and didn't want to do anything except for leech off of the system. So, you know, you need good owners. And I think from the PA side, we absolutely want, you know, smart, hardworking owners to be competitive and create parity. So a salary cap or not, if you're not running your team well, like you're not just going to, you know, if you don't know how to use your players and your talent, you might just, you know, be drafting someone first overall and burning their career, before they even walk through the door, right? So that, like, you know, ownership being smart and well run, an important aspect of this, and we, you know, with any system, we want all players to have an opportunity to feel like they can come into the league and be successful, or sign with a team and be successful. It's not a part of the job that we really have a direct interaction with, how teams like run their businesses. But, you know, I agree with you on the structural side of things regardless. You know, I'm not going to give you like, yes, we want a salary cap. That's obviously not going to be my position out of any gate. So like, that's not going to happen. But I do agree with you on the structural side.
You would be bad at your job if you said that.
I would. If I said we would like a salary cap and we would also never go on strike. Like these, you know, I would be probably prosecuted by someone pretty quickly. So that, but I do agree with you on like, the structure
and the health of the league and like the salary cap. Guys, this product, the LCS, is not on an upward trajectory. So things need to change in order for it to be sustainable in the long term, right? We can't just keep doing business this way because it's going down, guys. It's going down. So
I agree with you that even when we came into the league on EG side, like we saw a lot of complacency. There had been a lot of complacency. I'm hopeful that people are, you know, more active and more invested. I'm on the team owner side. I talk with team owners, but, you know, I'm not in their meetings, but getting proactive about how to, you know, do what's best for the league and improve the league. That's where my focus is. You know, I put a lot of effort in Champions Queue because when I was on the team side and when I've talked to players and when I talk to, you know, when I see the community react after every World's, you know, embarrassment, you know, one of the biggest things people talk about is like our players are in a substandard training environment. Like it discourages good imports. It worsens imports when they get here. It makes domestic players not develop how they should, you know. And so we addressed that and we worked, you know, to get progress on that. Like I'm going to take all the steps I can in my position supporting players to try and improve the condition of the league, to try and improve that. And a part of that, frankly, does come back to group rights and the structures and incentives that we have to go out and commercialize players in a way that creates fandom. Like we talked about with trading cards, like when you have not just being excited that JoJo's coming in as a rookie, but when you're involved in basketball or baseball trading cards and, you know, you got a LeBron James rookie card and you know that thing's worth money and you saw it gain, then 10 years later, guess what you're going to care about? You're going to be trying to figure out which pick do I want to get that rookie card from because it's going to be worth something someday. And you're investing in, again, the developmental space. You're watching the early players come through because you're excited. Like it's the same way as how sports gambling has come in and, you know, we know that sports betting is a huge part of traditional sports and the excitement a lot of people associate. Like having a stake in the game in some way as a fan is important to a lot of people. And that can be as simple as a trading card. Like there's a lot of story and narrative to be said about that, to be said about other structural items. And I know that we can do more and should be doing more to help build player brands and build the next generation of player brands that really pushes the LCS back up to the top and really creates that excitement that, you know, was really palpable, you know, 3 or 4 years ago. And it should be insulated from World's performance. Like Monty's saying, like we should have a healthy league that is competitive and has exciting players. We know we have exciting players. We need to market them and create that excitement so that our domestic league can be everything it can be regardless of World's performance. And we also want to do well at Worlds. And I'm going to say, for the record, we can do well at Worlds. And if we do, it's because my name is Aram.
By the way, on the topic, obviously this can be for any of the leagues and associations you're aware of, could be NFL, NBA, whatever. When they have do the players that play in the NFL, for example, are they actually allowed themselves to post footage of themselves, say on their Instagram? Do they have to have some sort of like, does the NFL have to sign off? And how does that work? Do they have some share in like their likeness rights in the actual game for the footage?
Again, will head to the part that I'm not an expert, pure and simple, on every piece of this. There's a few pieces. There are a few sections of this, though, that are like assumed rights or pieces that have been litigated in arbitration. For instance, like one question, you talk about the shakedown. I will not comment on any of that. I was not privy or experienced to it, and I have a good relationship with my contemporaries at the CSPPA today, and I believe that they're out there trying to do their best today. Won't speak to anything in the past. But when you talk about shakedown,
to be fair, the shaker downer left, so sure. It might have changed.
But I stay away from it regardless. But to that point of the idea of a shakedown, there is settled law through arbitration in traditional sports that I've gone through with our legal side about, well, what are the implied rights of participating in the league? Like, we're not going to be able to shake down Riot and say, hey, we got the group rights. You can't broadcast a game because players playing it.
Yes.
There's those things are baked in through arbitration that have said, if you are playing in the league, you are by proxy agreeing to participate in the inherent promotion and publishing of league things. So
there would be a sense of justice if you did that, though, because Riot can turn around and say you can't broadcast our intellectual property because they own the title. So maybe
I'm alluding
fair on that one.
The reason I wondered why is because I think, look, I understand more sponsorship for athletes anywhere outside the game. It's not like LeBron's run around in the game with a big Nike. Like, it's just the shoes he wears in the game is like an implied sponsorship, right? But the problem I see for esports people, again, is that in esports, the game dev is God in terms of in the game. Like, if people don't know, Riot essentially, it's actually one of the few things they do that I'd give them some credit for being magnanimous. They're not obliged to give us, for example, on this channel, the rights to show footage from the game. They can absolutely copyright strike the video and it would be upheld by Google/YouTube, and that would be the end. Like, the channel would get a strike. So I wondered if it was that much different, or if in sports, for example, like Julio Jones can't put a video of himself if the NFL really wanted to be assholes. I don't know, how does that work?
Yeah, I'm not an expert, so it's hard for me to say, but my understanding is there would be a generally allowed permission to use that in personal use, or especially anything that can be considered promotion of the league. That's a big part of the collaborative work that's done in traditional sports, is that you may be restricting group rights for players in commercial purposes, but if it has to do with promoting the league and the health and the wellness and the popularity of the league, like those things are mutually agreed upon at every one of those leagues that everybody participates. So I think to me that speaks no differently, but I'm not an expert to that extent on that minutia.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or be a pleb and don't.